In a luxurious mansion, a billionaire discovers that items from his storage room have gone missing 3 times in just 21 days. Suspicion falls on his elderly black housekeeper, the woman who has served his family for decades. The next day, he secretly follows her after work to uncover the truth. But what he finds doesn't expose a thief. It shatters his assumptions and changes everything he thought he knew. Before we dive deeper into this story, tell me, where are you listening from? And don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow I've got something special waiting for you. Owen Everett Holmes was not a man who missed details. At 32, he ran a multinational development firm with the kind of precision normally reserved for neurosurgery. People described him as brilliant, decisive, emotionally unavailable, but efficient to the core. He dressed in dark suits with barely a crease, spoke in clipped tones that left no room for guessing, and moved through life as if every second not accounted for was a failure in management. He wasn't cruel, he wasn't warm, he simply functioned on a level where empathy was impractical. That morning, Owen delivered the keynote at the Summit on Equity and Technology in Urban Renewal. The applause echoed cleanly across the auditorium as he stepped away from the podium, his tailored suit catching the light just right. His speech, structured around data models and ethical return on investment, was praised as sharp, forward-thinking, and coolly visionary. He nodded through the compliments, posed for the requested photos, then slipped out exactly 2 minutes ahead of schedule. The drive home to the northern edge of New Camden was silent. He didn't like music in the car. It distracted him. Instead, he reviewed a dashboard of live company metrics on his tablet project: overruns, hiring delays, shipment efficiency, investment risk scores. Everything was within thresholds, as it should be. His estate recognized his vehicle on approach. Gates opened automatically. Lights inside adjusted. The front entrance clicked open before he reached the last step. Layla James was standing just inside, as she always did. No words, just a nod and a slight adjustment of the folded cloth in her hand. "Welcome home, Mr. Holmes," she said softly. "Anything urgent?" "No, sir. Your messages are on your desk. Dinner will be ready at 7. He nodded, already halfway up the stairs. Layla didn't follow. She returned to the kitchen, disappearing into routine. Layla had worked in the Holmes household since Owen was 5. After the accident that took his parents, she had been the one to sit by his bed at night, the one to comb his hair before school, the one who remembered which foods made him sick, which dreams made him cry, and which books soothed him back to sleep. She had never asked for recognition. She had never expected it. Over the years, her presence had become part of the house, like the polished floor or the steady ticking of the hall clock. Later that evening, while checking the latest performance reports from a portfolio partner in Singapore, Owen noticed a system flag in the home management interface. It was minor: 3 instances over 21 days of unaccounted for items from the food inventory and first aid cabinet. Quantities were small: a few cans, a couple of energy bars, a bottle of antiseptic, all flagged by the automated reconciliation log as missing with no associated event. He stared at the notification. It wasn't enough to sound an alarm, but it was inconsistent, and Owen did not tolerate inconsistency. Not in his business, not in his home. He accessed the internal access logs. Only 4 individuals had nighttime clearance to Storage himself, his assistant, who was currently on vacation, the estate's head chef, who had not worked nights in over a month, and Layla. Her name appeared on 3 dates. Each time roughly between 10:15 and 10:45 p.m., each time aligned precisely with the anomalies. He didn't react, not outwardly. He simply sat back, stared at the screen a little longer, and felt something shift inside his chest. Not anger, not suspicion, something stranger, something colder. The kind of feeling you get when someone you thought you understood suddenly doesn't match the picture anymore. It wasn't the food, it wasn't the supplies. He had more than enough of everything. It was the silence, the unspoken act. Layla had access. She knew the system. She could have asked, but she didn't. He turned off the monitor, closed the tablet, and looked toward the hallway. The house was quiet, impeccable. Layla was somewhere in it, folding linen or adjusting the lighting for the evening schedule, doing what she had always done, supporting his life without ever stepping into its center. And for the first time in years, Owen realized he had no idea what Layla James did after she left the estate. No idea where she went, who she spoke to, whether she had family or friends, what she ate for dinner when she wasn't cooking his. He knew the time she woke up, the way she ironed his cuffs, the exact temperature she steeped his tea. But he didn't know her, and now, for reasons he couldn't explain yet, that felt like a problem. Owen didn't sleep well that night. He wasn't tossing or pacing or replaying the data in his head. It wasn't even that kind of restlessness. It was the kind that lived just under the skin. A tightness, a mild pulse in the chest that refused to be reasoned with. The kind of discomfort that didn't interrupt your logic, but quietly challenged it. By morning, the feeling hadn't passed, and by the following evening, it had grown into a decision. He told his assistant to clear his last meeting. No details, just a reschedule. He turned down dinner with the investors from Toronto. Then just after 9:30, Owen stepped into his own car, a black electric sedan with glass that darkened at the push of a button, and drove himself out of the estate. He took the long way through the city, not the express route, but the surface streets past the banks that bore his name in glass, past the high rises where he knew every tenant by unit and margin. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for, only that he couldn't ignore it anymore. By 10:15, he was parked down the street from the estate. His estate. From that angle, with the windows dark and lights automated, it looked like a set piece, not a home. He watched from inside the car as Layla stepped out the side gate, carrying the same cloth bag he had seen folded in the laundry room earlier that week. She wore a long gray coat, the kind that kept warmth in and questions out, and a scarf pulled neatly across her neck. Her steps were steady, not hurried, not secretive, just deliberate. Owen waited until she turned the corner, then followed. She didn't take a car. She walked to the bus stop, waited under the flickering street lamp, and boarded the city line toward the east side. Owen trailed behind in silence, never too close, always just far enough. The further they went, the more the scenery changed. The manicured sidewalks gave way to cracked pavement. The luxury apartments became weather-stained brick. Storefronts dimmed. Street noise shifted from the buzz of nightlife to the drone of tired machinery and distant radios. When Layla stepped off the bus, she moved through the neighborhood like someone who had lived there for years. No hesitation, no confusion. She turned down a narrow side street past a closed laundromat, then slipped into a low building with chipped paint and barred windows. The sign above the door read in peeling letters, Community Youth Resource Center. Owen parked at the far end of the block and approached on foot, stopping just short of the entrance. He peered through the side window. Not to spy, he told himself, but to observe, to understand. Inside, Layla was arranging food on a folding table. Plastic containers carefully packed, clearly labeled, not the expensive sort, the kind used in diners and church basements. She laid out rice beans, cooked vegetables, soft rolls, and soup. Steam lifted from the containers, fogging the air slightly. Around her, about a dozen children, ranging in age from maybe 5 to 12, waited in soft lines. They didn't rush. They knew her. One girl, no more than 8, asked, "Where's this food from?" Miss Layla smiled, warm but worn. "From good people who didn't need it, but I made sure it came here while it still mattered." The girl nodded. No follow-up questions, just gratitude. Layla handed her a plate and moved to the next. Owen didn't move. He didn't breathe for a second. It wasn't shame he felt. Not yet. It was something else. It was the sharp, almost juvenile sting of not being trusted, not included. She could have asked. She could have said something. But instead, she took what belonged to him, no matter how trivial it might seem, and walked it out the door like it was hers to give. It wasn't the food. Of course it wasn't the food. It was the fact that she chose not to tell him, that she assumed she had to work around him, not with him. That despite everything they had shared, decades of quiet, functional coexistence, she still didn't think he was the kind of man you could come to with a need. She had made a decision, and he had been left out of it. He watched her for a while longer, his arms crossed the air thick around him. Layla didn't look like someone trying to get away with something. She looked like someone doing exactly what she believed had to be done. Calm, firm, steady. The same way she had ironed his shirts, packed his suitcases, folded the corners of his sheets. Except now she was doing it for someone else, without his permission. Owen turned from the window and walked slowly back toward the car. The streets were still quiet. The sky hung low and gray. As he settled into the driver's seat, he didn't start the engine. He sat there gripping the wheel, staring into the dashboard, thinking about how strange it felt to be on the outside of something that involved your own name, your own property, your own house. He wasn't angry, Not in the way people expected anger to look, but he was something. He just didn't have a word for it yet, and that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. The next afternoon, Owen found himself in front of a building he wouldn't have looked at twice any other day. It was low, old, and beige with flaking paint. The entryway was cracked, and the doorbell looked like it hadn't worked in a decade. There were 3 mailboxes taped shut with the names written in permanent marker. He had parked around the corner, walked the last block alone, and now stood at the base of the narrow stairs, trying to understand what he was doing there. He knew why, but he didn't understand it yet. He climbed slowly. The stairwell smelled faintly of cleaning solution and fried onions. The hallway was dim, the overhead light flickering. He paused in front of the apartment labeled 2B and knocked twice. No one answered right away, and just as he was about to knock again, the door opened. A small boy stood there, maybe 9 or 10, thin, with big eyes and a cautious curiosity. He wore a worn sweatshirt and mismatched socks. When he looked up and saw Owen, he didn't flinch. He just blinked. "Are you Mr. Owen?" Owen hesitated. "Yes. Is your grandmother here?" "Not yet. She's still at the center. You want to come in?" Owen didn't know what to say. He stepped in slowly, almost unsure of his own weight. The apartment was small, immaculate. The walls were faded but decorated with family photos, religious art, and hand-drawn pictures, some clearly made by the boy. The furniture was clean, but second-hand, arranged with care. In one corner was a bookshelf with several rows of paperbacks worn from use. "You want some water?" the boy asked. Owen opened his mouth, then closed it. "Sure." The boy disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a cup. "It's warm. The fridge doesn't make it cold anymore." Owen took it. "Thank you. You look different than the pictures. Older." "What pictures?" The boy pointed to a small frame on the shelf beside the couch. Owen walked over and saw it, a grainy black and white newspaper photo of him as a child, maybe 8, standing at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Next to him was his grandfather. Behind them, barely visible, was Layla holding a clipboard. "My grandmother says you were a good boy, just quiet, always thinking." Owen didn't know how to respond to that. He looked around the room. On the wall near the kitchen, he noticed a framed certificate. It was yellowed, the corners curling under the frame. He stepped closer and read the print, Certified Practical Nurse, State of New Jersey, issued 1986. He turned toward the boy. "Your grandmother was a nurse, she was." But she stopped when someone said they didn't want a black lady touching their baby. That was a long time ago. Owen looked back at the certificate. He didn't say anything. "She tried to volunteer at clinics after that," the boy added, "but she said she got tired of being thanked with silence." There was something sharp in that sentence. Owen felt it lodge in his throat. "She works a lot," the boy continued, "and she never takes anything from your house unless it's stuff people were going to throw away, like the food from the fridge when it gets marked expired. She checks the labels. She says she'd never give us anything that could hurt someone." Owen sat down on the armrest of the couch. He didn't trust the weight of his body on the old frame. "What's your name, Louis?" "Nice to meet you, Louis." Louis nodded politely. "You ever been here before?" "No," Owen said quietly. Louis looked around the room. "It's not fancy, but it's safe. That's what Grandma says matters most." Owen nodded, eyes lingering on the details. A stack of medical documents sat on the edge of the table. One was an insurance form half filled. Another was a medication list with dates and check marks. Next to them was a bottle of generic pain reliever half empty. Everything in the room told a story Owen had never asked to hear. Not because he didn't care, or maybe exactly because he didn't want to risk caring more than his position allowed. The door opened. Layla stepped in, grocery bag in hand, paused when she saw Owen. For a brief moment, her eyebrows rose. Surprise, definitely. But it faded quickly into something gentler, more curious than cautious. "Well," she said, placing the bag down, "this is unexpected." Owen stood unsure whether to apologize or explain. Layla looked from him to Louis. "Did he offer you water? At least he did," Owen said. "Good. I raised him right." She took off her coat, hung it neatly on a peg by the door, and turned back to him. "I was going to make something simple for dinner. You hungry?" Owen hesitated. "It won't poison you, Mr. Holmes," she added with a small smile. "Just lentils and rice." He nodded once. That would be fine. Layla worked quickly in the kitchen. Louis helped set the table with quiet confidence. Owen watched it all like a visitor in a country he'd never studied. Layla moved differently here. Not careful, not deferential, just herself. and it was the first time he realized he had never really seen her be that person. During the meal, they talked about small things, books, Louis liked the weather that week, a teacher who said Louis had potential. Nothing was said about work, about the house, or about the food that traveled between them. It was just dinner. Ordinary. Kind. And yet, as the meal ended and Louis carried the dishes to the sink, Owen felt something settle in him he hadn't expected, a kind of peace laced with discomfort, because this version of Layla laughing with her grandson explaining how to steam rice without wasting gas humming softly while rinsing plates was so far removed from the quiet shadow who folded his shirts that he wasn't sure which one was the real her. Or worse, if he had ever really known her at all. The drive back felt longer than it should have. The streets were nearly empty, washed in the quiet yellow of early evening streetlights. Owen kept both hands on the wheel, his eyes forward, though the road barely registered. His mind was still in that small apartment with the uneven floor, the faded photos. The quiet boy and the woman who had for 2 decades moved through his life like clockwork. The scent of lentils still clung to his jacket. He hadn't said much when he left just to thank you. Layla hadn't asked why he came. She didn't press. And somehow that unsettled him more than if she had. When he arrived home, the house greeted him in the usual way. Lights adjusted, temperature stabilized. A soft chime welcomed him back. But nothing about it felt right. Not tonight. He bypassed the living room and kitchen and went straight to his home office. The monitors blinked awake before he touched a key. The central dashboard pulsed with efficiency project timelines, investment tickers, environmental controls, household logs. He ignored everything else and pulled up the inventory system. He reopened the flagged incident reports. 3 incidents spread over 21 days, each marked with missing or unaccounted for items from pantry or medical stock. The logs had been auto-flagged due to discrepancies between expected and recorded quantities. He clicked through each record again, this time slowly. On first glance, it looked like Layla's name lined up exactly with the anomalies. But now, after everything he had seen and felt and tasted, he looked deeper. He opened the time-stamped warehouse scans. The kitchen staff was required to document expired or discarded food weekly. Most did, but not all. He noticed something new this time. On each flagged day, there was a matching entry by the sous chef labeled menu substitution. A few lines down, an item marked for discard. Not removed, just marked, but the final deletion log was missing. He checked with the system override key and ran an audit. Of the 10 food items marked missing, 7 had been recorded earlier that day for discard due to nearing expiration or damage. But because the discard action wasn't completed, meaning no one scanned the item out of inventory, the system still counted them as present. The remaining 3 were marked as non-conforming stock by the catering software items not selected for official menu service due to presentation or packaging defects. All flagged as waste, none recorded as removed. He stared at the screen. The cursor blinked slowly at the edge of the data grid. He moved on to the medicine cabinet log. Similar issue. A bottle of over-the-counter antiseptic had passed its usage date by 48 hours. Another bottle of allergy relief marked with a missing cap. A nutritional shake in damaged packaging. All items scheduled for replacement. None scanned out. All flagged as missing. What the system called a breach was in fact human omission. A small break in protocol. A task unfinished. A step skipped. And Layla, operating with her usual care and silence, had likely seen what no one else bothered to see, that those items, while technically expired, were still safe, still usable, still able to serve someone who needed them. He sat back in his chair. The room was dim, the soft glow of the monitors the only light. He rubbed the bridge of his nose and closed his eyes. There was no theft, no deception, no betrayal, just an invisible, unspoken act of quiet correction, of salvage, of service. And he had assumed the worst. It wasn't malicious. He hadn't come at her with blame or accusations, but he had doubted her, even for a moment. And worse than that, he hadn't known her well enough to know better. He opened the personnel file marked James Layla. It was sparse. Start date, pay history, emergency contact none, performance record flawless. He clicked through to the notes section. Blank. Not a single entry. 27 years of presence. No incident. No recognition. No acknowledgement. He leaned forward again and typed into the log entry box. Discrepancy resolved. No further action required. Human error mine. He saved the note, then closed the file. closed the system, sat in the silence. He thought about the warm water Louis had served, the mismatched socks, the way Layla had offered dinner not with obligation, but with ease, as if welcoming him into her world was not a burden, but a matter of fact. He thought about the photograph of himself on her wall, the medical forms stacked beside the couch, the certificate from a career that ended not because of performance, but because of prejudice. He had spent a lifetime building systems, streamlining processes, eliminating inefficiencies. He believed in clarity, in evidence, in control. But tonight, what unraveled him wasn't a failure of system or logic. It was a failure to see, to ask, to know. And he wondered not for the first time that evening how many other people had moved through his life unnoticed. Not because they were quiet, but because he had never thought to listen to the noise they didn't make. He stood finally and walked out into the hallway. The house, efficient as ever, lit his path with soft light. But it felt colder now. Not because the temperature had changed, but because something else had. He passed the kitchen, paused for a moment, then turned back and opened the pantry. Everything lined up, labeled, restocked, perfect, and meaningless. He closed the door, turned out the light, and went to bed. Not because he was tired, but because he didn't know what else to do next. Tomorrow, he thought he would. 3 days passed before Owen returned, not because he was avoiding it, but because he wasn't sure what he was bringing with him when he came back. Words weren't enough. An apology felt insufficient, and anything more felt presumptuous. But on the third evening, just after sunset, he found himself again standing outside that narrow door marked 2B, his hand raised to knock before he could think of a reason not to. The door opened quicker than last time. Layla stood there wearing a plain house sweater and jeans, her hands still damp from dishes. She paused when she saw him, her expression unreadable, then stepped aside without a word to let him in. Owen took it as permission. Inside the apartment was quiet. Louis lay on the couch wrapped in a blanket, his forehead damp with a thin sheen of sweat. A humidifier hissed gently in the corner. Layla motioned for Owen to sit in the armchair across from the couch, then disappeared into the kitchen for a moment before returning with a cup of warm tea. She handed it to him without a word, then sat down slowly at the dining table, her eyes fixed on the boy. "How long has he been sick?" Owen asked, his voice low. 3 days. Low-grade fever, wheezing, night cough. "Same thing from last winter," she said. "Pediatric asthma. Comes in waves." He nodded. "Has he seen a doctor?" She met his gaze directly. "Soon." He didn't push. He looked around the room again, now more familiar than foreign. The medical forms were still stacked near the couch. The same nursing certificate hung crookedly by the bathroom door. A new bottle of prescription medication sat half full on the counter, the label nearly peeled off from condensation. I checked everything he said quietly. The logs, the inventory, the flags. It was never about you. It was the system. Or rather, it was me not knowing enough to question the system sooner. Layla didn't flinch. She reached for a towel and dabbed Louis's forehead gently, then pulled the blanket closer around his shoulders. She didn't answer. "You should have a better place than this," he added. That made her look at him again, her expression calm but clear. "I had one," she said. "A 2-bedroom ground floor near a decent school. That was before my daughter got sick. We sold it for the treatment. What we didn't sell went to debt. Then she died. Then Louis got sick. Then the center lost funding, so I started bringing the kids here after hours." Her tone never turned bitter, just plain matter of fact. "You make more than enough to afford another home," Owen said carefully. "My salary covers rent, food, and medication," she replied. "It doesn't cover stability, Mr. Holmes. That costs more than money these days." He leaned forward, "Then let me help." "You already have," she said, motioning toward the cup in his hand. "You came back." He set the tea down. "I can do more. I want to." She smiled gently. "Owen, I've never resented you for the years between us. You were a child when I came into your life, and you grew up into a man with responsibilities I can't even imagine. I watched you build your world. I never expected to be part of it. I was there to keep things steady while you moved forward. That was my role, and I accepted it with pride." She paused, looked at him fully. "I love you like a son, but I never mistook myself for your mother. I knew my place, and I never blamed you for the distance. I always hoped, though, that if life ever brought you back, you'd know the door was open." Owen swallowed hard. "Then let me stand in it now. Not to fix the past, just to be here. As I am. That matters," she said. "It matters more than you know." Louis stirred, then murmuring something unintelligible. Layla knelt beside him, whispered into his ear, then turned to retrieve a nebulizer from the small cabinet. She plugged it in, placed the mask over his face, and turned it on. Owen watched something sharp twisting inside him. He had seen medical reports, end-of-quarter losses, even rescue operations for business deals gone wrong. But he had never sat still and watched someone care like this, someone who never asked for anything in return. "Let me take him to my doctor," he said. "Tonight. He's not breathing right." Layla hesitated. "We can't afford it. You won't have to. That's not how this works." "It is now," Owen said firmly. They locked eyes for a long second. Then finally, Layla stood. "I'll get his shoes." The hospital lobby smelled like antiseptic and fresh paint. Owen paced while Layla sat beside Louis in the waiting area. The boy leaned into her shoulder, eyes half closed. She stroked his hair without saying a word. The nurse called them in after 20 minutes. Owen insisted on staying. He stood beside the doctor, answered questions, filled in gaps. He watched as Louis was examined, scanned, stabilized. The pediatrician prescribed a new inhaler, a steroid shot, and a 2-day observation. Owen signed every form without flinching. Later in the hallway outside the room, Layla approached him. Her shoulders were tense, but her voice was calm. "You did all this without asking me. I know. I told you we're not a charity case. You're not," he said. "But I owe you more than charity. I owe you everything I forgot to see." Layla looked at him like she was trying to decide whether to accept the truth or protect herself from it. Finally, she sighed. "He needs more than prescriptions. He needs hope." "So do I," Owen said, "and I think you've given it to me whether you meant to or not." She nodded slowly. "Then don't disappear when it gets hard." "I won't." That night, Owen stayed at the hospital. He didn't call his assistant. He didn't respond to the 37 unread messages from board members and investors. He sat in the hallway, watching the rhythmic beep of the monitor from just inside the door, thinking of all the things he didn't know how to say, and all the ways he could start doing more than say them. At some point, Layla brought him a blanket, folded no words, just a look. He unfolded it, pulled it over his shoulders, and closed his eyes. Not because he was tired, but because for the first time in years, he felt safe enough to rest. It was nearly noon when Genevieve walked into Owen's office without knocking. She moved with the same sharp precision she always had, heels echoing softly against the marble floor, a beige folder tucked under one arm, sunglasses perched on her head like she had just stepped off a boardroom runway. She didn't speak until the door clicked shut behind her. "You missed 2 strategic planning meetings this week," she said. Owen looked up from his screen, blinking once. "I rescheduled them." Without explanation. "I didn't think one was needed." Genevieve exhaled through her nose the way she did when preparing to deal with something she found unpleasant but necessary. She stepped closer and set the folder on his desk carefully, like placing a document at a deposition. "People are talking," she said. "Investors, partners. Your absence is being noticed. They want to know if you're still running the company or checking out." Owen closed his laptop. He didn't reach for the folder. "I'm not checking out," he said. "I'm choosing where to be present." Genevieve raised an eyebrow. "And where exactly is that? At a hospital bedside for the grandson of your housekeeper." He didn't flinch. "He has a name. It's Louis. And she's not just a housekeeper." Genevieve folded her arms. "I'm not here to question your empathy, Owen. I'm here because we built something together. Something real. Something powerful. And you're threatening to undo it by letting sentiment guide your decision-making." He stood slowly, not to intimidate, but to meet her eye to eye. "What do you think we built? Stability, authority, reputation, image." "That too," she said without apology. "And in our world, image is everything." Owen walked around his desk and leaned against the edge, arms folded. "Let me tell you what I saw this week. I saw a boy struggling to breathe while his grandmother paced through a hospital waiting room, trying to stay composed. I saw forms she couldn't afford to sign. I saw a woman who never asked for anything from anyone, holding it all together with a plastic spoon and a heating pad. And I saw a system, my system, that didn't account for her. Not because she was invisible, but because I never bothered to look." Genevieve softened slightly, but didn't back down. "And how does that help the board, the foundation?" Your name, Owen, took a breath. "It helps me become someone worth carrying that name." Silence stretched between them. A long one. She glanced toward the window, her jaw tight. "Do you know how hard we worked to get this company where it is?" she said. "How many things we turned down? How many optics we had to maintain? And now, you're throwing it all into a community center with hand-painted signs." "No," he said. I'm choosing to support something that's never had signs, never had attention, never had people like us show up and just listen. Genevieve stepped closer. Is this about guilt? Because if it is, that fades. It always does. It's not guilt, he said. It's gratitude and clarity. I'm starting to see how small I was in the world I thought I ran. Her eyes narrowed. So what now? You want to start over? Become a mentor, a hero? He shook his head. No, I just want to be decent. That feels like a good beginning. Genevieve glanced at the folder on the desk. The board has questions. If you keep making unsanctioned disbursements to external causes without a strategic framework, you risk losing voting confidence. Then let them vote. She studied him for a beat longer, then sighed, her voice lower now. You used to call me first when things got complicated. This isn't complicated, he said. It's simple. I want the world I live in to include people like Layla and Louie, not just people who manage them. Her mouth tightened like she wanted to argue but didn't have the words. You used to see things in structures, she said. Now you're chasing shadows. No, he said. Now I'm chasing what's real. Genevieve reached for the folder, hesitated, then left it on the desk. I hope you know what you're doing, Owen. He nodded. I finally do. She walked to the door, paused, then looked over her shoulder. Don't lose everything trying to save one piece of yourself. He gave her a faint smile. Maybe I'm not trying to save a piece. Maybe I'm trying to build something new. When she was gone, the room felt heavier for a moment, then strangely lighter. He walked back to his desk, picked up the folder, and set it aside. Then he opened a blank page and began drafting a personal funding structure, one that didn't ask for permission, one that answered only to the people it served. Not because he wanted recognition, but because for the first time in a long time he knew exactly what he stood for. Louis opened his eyes quietly the next morning. The hospital room was dim, the blinds drawn halfway, a gray light slipping in from the side, like it wasn't sure it was welcome. Owen was already there, seated in the corner chair with a paperback in his lap and his phone turned over on the side table. He hadn't left during the night. He hadn't said anything when the nurses came in to check vitals at 2 and 4. He just sat there watching the monitors and listening to the soft rise and fall of a child's breath through an oxygen mask. Louis blinked a few times, then slowly reached up and pulled the mask away. Did you fall asleep here? Owen looked up from the page he wasn't really reading. I did. In that chair, Owen nodded. It's not as bad as it looks. Louis smiled, small and lopsided. You're not very good at sleeping, huh? Not really, Owen admitted, but I'm learning. The boy shifted slightly under the blanket. Did you bring that spacebook again? Owen reached into his bag without a word and pulled out 3. One was about the solar system, another about astronauts, and the third had glossy pages filled with deep space telescopic images. He held them out like a magician revealing his best trick. You pick, he said. Louis chose the one with stars and black holes and opened it gently, as if afraid it might disappear. Owen scooted the chair closer and started reading, his voice quiet but steady. Layla appeared at the door 15 minutes later, watching them for a long moment without interrupting. Her coat was still buttoned, and a paper bag of food hung from her wrist. She said nothing at first, just set the bag on the windowsill and sat down at the far end of the room, letting the words fill the space between them all. After a while, Louis fell asleep again, the book resting on his chest. Owen looked over at Layla. He's doing better, he said. She nodded. I know the signs. Owen stood and walked over to her, handing her the cup of coffee he'd picked up earlier. She took it without protest. For a few minutes, they sat in silence, watching Louis breathe. He asked if I'd come next weekend, Owen said. Layla glanced at him, then turned her eyes back to the boy. And what did you say? I told him to save me a seat. She smiled, then barely, but it was real. He likes you. That means something. He sees me, Owen said quietly. I think that means everything. 2 days later, when Louis was discharged, Owen insisted on driving them home. Layla didn't argue. She sat in the back seat with her grandson, resting a hand on his shoulder as the car wound its way through the city. They didn't speak much during the ride, and they didn't need to. It was the kind of quiet that comes from shared experience, not avoidance. As Owen helped carry their things up the stairs to the apartment, Louis looked up at him from the landing. Are you coming back tomorrow? Owen paused, adjusted the strap of the bag on his shoulder. I'll be here before you finish breakfast. Louis grinned and pushed open the door. By Saturday, Owen found himself at the community center again. This time, he didn't wait for an invitation. He just showed up, rolled up his sleeves, and started stacking folding chairs. The space was busier than usual, a handful of volunteers setting up reading stations, a few parents bringing their kids early. Layla was there already placing a row of plastic cups beside a cooler of juice. She looked up surprised, but not startled. "You came back. I told you I would." "Yes," she said, handing him a stack of napkins. "But people say a lot of things when they're feeling needed." He didn't answer, just started arranging the cups. A girl about 6 tugged on his sleeve 10 minutes later. "Are you the guy with the books?" Owen crouched down. "I might be. What do you like to read?" She tilted her head. "Dragons, but only nice ones. Let me see what I can do." By noon, a group of kids had taken to calling him Uncle O, a nickname that started as a whisper and eventually turned into a chant when he agreed to lead storytime. He didn't mind. In fact, he laughed, really laughed, when one of them handed him a drawing labeled Uncle O and the Super Readers. He kept it in his coat pocket the rest of the day. Later, as the kids filed out with their guardians, Layla stood by the door with a clipboard checking names and offering gentle reminders about snacks and homework. Owen leaned against the far wall watching her work. She was steady, patient, in control, but different. Lighter. When the room finally emptied, she walked over to him and handed him a bottle of water. "You handled the sugar rush better than I expected." "I've handled boardroom buyouts," he said. "That was tougher." She laughed, not a full laugh, but enough to show he wasn't entirely wrong. They stood there for a moment, both holding bottles, both looking at the chalkboard where a child had scrawled the word hope in bright pink. "Thank you for staying," she said. He nodded. "I didn't know how much I needed to." When he left that afternoon, Louis walked him to the steps. They sat for a minute, knees touching eyes on the street below. "Do you think people can really change?" Louis asked, voice low. Owen thought about it, about everything, about boardrooms and bedsides and the weight of a child's trust, only when someone sees them enough to believe it. Louis looked up at him. "I see you." Owen smiled, then no layers, no roles. Just a man on a step beside a boy who had every reason not to trust anyone, and yet still did. It was a beginning, and he was exactly where he wanted to be. The following week, Owen arrived at the community center just after noon with no tie, no driver, and no intention of staying in the background. He had called ahead not to announce his presence, but to ask for time to meet with the group of volunteers who managed the day-to-day programs. They gathered in the back room, folding chairs pulled into a rough circle, clipboards in hand, skepticism in the air. It wasn't hostility he felt when he walked in. It was caution, the kind that comes from too many promises broken by people who never stay long enough to help clean up. Owen stood instead of sitting, not because he wanted to dominate, but because he wanted them to see him clearly. No filter, no angle. "Thank you for making time," he began. "I know you all have more pressing things to do than listen to a man in dress shoes talk about community, so I'll keep this short. I've been here a few weeks. Not long enough to understand everything, but long enough to know what I didn't see before. You all are doing something rare. You're holding space for people no one else does. And I want to support that not by leading it, but by getting out of the way and giving you the tools to keep going." He laid out a proposal, a dedicated fund, monthly disbursements, no corporate branding, no PR press kits, just steady resources and the freedom to use them where they mattered most. No approval process through his office, no photos for social media. One of the volunteers, a middle-aged woman with a clipboard full of student rosters, raised her hand slowly. "And what do you want in return?" she asked. Owen smiled. "I want to stop showing up like an outsider." The room stayed quiet for a beat. Then someone else nodded, then another. Eventually, the room exhaled. Not with applause, but with a cautious kind of agreement. Layla, who had stood quietly in the corner the whole time, walked over once the meeting ended. "You realize you just gave up all the control," she said. "Maybe I never needed it," Owen replied. A few days later, he asked Layla to meet him at the office of the community foundation overseeing the neighborhood grants. He held the door open for her, and when she walked into the boardroom, she paused. It was a simple space, round table stack of folders, a small pitcher of water, but the weight of it was not lost on her. "Why am I here?" she asked, voice even. "Because this is your program now," Owen said. "Not just the kitchen and the books, the budget, the direction, the voice." Layla stared at the empty seat in front of her. "I've never sat at a table like this before. You've led without one for decades. Now I'm just giving it a name." She looked at him, then long and slow, as if searching his face for irony or pity. She found neither. "You sure about this completely?" She nodded once and sat down. That was all it took. Back at the center, Louis was walking again with more strength. His cheeks had color again, and his steps no longer wavered at every turn. He helped smaller kids with puzzles, pointed to books he'd already read, explained words with a calm confidence that felt earned, not rehearsed. One girl, maybe 5, tugged Owen's jacket one morning. "Are you Louis's dad?" she asked. Owen chuckled, crouching next to her. "No, I'm lucky to be his friend." The girl nodded as if that made perfect sense. That weekend, the center held its first community open house under the new funding initiative. Layla had planned it with the team: a few speeches, a shared meal, a table of donated books free for the taking. No stage, no spotlights, just people, food, and stories. When she took the mic that afternoon, the room fell still. Layla stood tall in a plain dress and soft cardigan, no makeup, no pretense. She looked at every face before her. "We didn't start this with plans or projections. We started it because kids needed a safe place to be themselves. And over time, we added books and food and medicine because they needed those things too. But the truth is, the only thing a community really needs to grow, to survive, to feel whole, is to be seen. Sometimes that's all it takes. Someone noticing we're here." Owen listened from the back row, arms crossed over his chest, not to protect, but to hold steady. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't smile for the camera. There wasn't one, but he felt something loosen in him with every word she spoke. Afterwards, as the chairs were folded and the last plates cleared, Owen stayed behind to help stack trays. Layla joined him, passing him a bag of leftover bread rolls. "They liked what you did today," she said. "It wasn't about me." She nodded. "Exactly." They stepped outside into the fading light. The street was quiet now. The kids had gone home. The noise settled, but the air still buzzed faintly with what had been created there. Layla looked toward the playground, then back at him. "You didn't change the world today." Owen followed her gaze. "No," he said, "but I helped someone dream in it." Layla didn't smile, but her hand brushed lightly against his elbow. "That's how it begins," she said. And in that moment, beneath the sky turning from gold to gray, neither of them needed to say anything more. The email came on a Wednesday afternoon, tucked between a reminder about Louis's medication refill and a forwarded notice about a book drive. Layla nearly deleted it before opening it, assuming it was spam or some kind of mailing list she never signed up for. But the subject line stopped her cold invitation to speak: Community Voices in Education Conference. She read it once, then again, then once more, slower word by word. They were inviting her to speak at a city-run forum alongside educators, youth advocates, and nonprofit directors. They wanted to hear about the reading program, about the kids, about her. She didn't respond that day, or the next. On Friday, she brought it up to Owen. They were standing outside the center after hours watching Louis toss a deflated soccer ball with 2 other kids in the parking lot. "I got a strange email," she said. Owen looked over. "Strange good or strange bad? They want me to speak at some city conference about education or community or I don't know. That doesn't sound bad." Layla crossed her arms. "They must think I'm someone else." Owen didn't answer right away. He watched the kids for a minute, then turned to her fully. "If the room exists, it's yours to walk into. They don't get to decide if you belong. You do." Layla shook her head lightly, the corners of her mouth tight. "I've never stood at a podium in my life. I speak to kids on carpet squares and mamas in kitchens, not professionals in suits." "Then speak like that," Owen said. "That's why they need you there." A pause. Then quietly, "You think they'll listen to someone like me?" Owen didn't blink. "I did." That night she clicked reply and said, "Yes." In the week that followed, Louis helped her practice. She sat at the kitchen table with a notebook while he read aloud what she had scribbled in pencil. He made gentle edits, crossing out words like "ain't" not because they were wrong, but because he said they deserved to hear her clearly. She rewrote it twice, but still kept it hers. Plain words, real sentences. One night he asked, "Are you nervous?" She nodded. "I've been invisible most of my life. Standing up there feels like yelling in a church." Louis smiled, missing one front tooth. Maybe that church needs to hear it loud. The morning of the event, Layla wore a clean cardigan and slacks. Her good shoes shined as much as they could be. She refused to let anyone write her speech. She didn't want a slideshow. She didn't want a script on a podium. She took her folded notes in her purse and walked into the downtown Civic Hall just after 10. Owen was already there, sitting 2 rows from the back. He didn't wave, didn't call attention, just looked at her with the kind of quiet that told her she didn't need to prove a thing. The room held maybe 70 people, principals, librarians, funders, advocates. Most had badges, titles, or branded polos. Layla had a name tag that said, "Only Miss James." When they called her up, she walked calmly to the front, unfolded her paper, then didn't look at it. "Good morning," she began. "I didn't come here to impress anyone. I came because someone finally asked." She paused. A few pens stopped moving. "I don't have a degree in education. I'm not a principal or a program director. I'm a grandmother raising my grandson, and every Saturday I sit in a folding chair and listen to kids read out loud. Not because I was trained to do that, but because they needed someone who cared enough to stay." She told them about Lewis, about the other kids, about the community center that started with nothing but a broken bookshelf and 3 donated boxes of paperbacks. She told them about kids reading by hallway light, about sharing granola bars so no one would feel left out. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't use data. She just told the truth. And then, for a moment, she paused and added something that wasn't in her notes. "Years ago, I helped raise a boy whose parents were taken too early. He grew up in a house too big and too quiet. I made his lunch. I folded his shirts. I walked past his trophies. He never asked about my life, and I never expected him to. But I watched him grow, and I loved him like a son, even when he didn't see me standing there. And now, he sees. That tells me we can all change if we let ourselves." At the end, she folded her paper again. "You don't need a title to lead. You need presence. And you need to care." She stepped down. There was no standing ovation, no clapping frenzy. But something better happened. The room went still, like it had just witnessed something rare. When applause came, it was slow, steady, and deeply felt. Afterward, people lined up. Not many, but enough. A teacher asked for advice. A nonprofit lead offered to share books. A city official asked if she'd meet with their school board. Layla nodded politely, took business cards with both hands, said thank you with a small smile that never quite widened. Outside, Owen waited by the sidewalk as the last few guests trickled out of the hall. "You didn't even look at your podium notes," he said, a trace of admiration in his voice. Layla gave a small shrug, calm and steady. "Didn't need them." Owen smiled. "How did it feel standing up there?" She took a breath, thoughtful, loud, but good loud, the kind that reaches places silence never could. That evening, back on the porch at home, Layla sat with Louis. The sky was fading into soft lavender, the kind of light that made everything feel softer. Louis handed her a juice box, one of the ones they always kept cold just for him. They sat side by side without talking for a while until he looked over and asked, "So, you gonna do more speeches now?" Layla laughed, not big, but real. "Maybe, but not for the applause." Then why he asked. She looked up at the sky again, then down the quiet street in front of them. Her voice was soft but sure. "Because somewhere out there's another woman like me sitting in the back of some school hall, thinking her voice doesn't count. Maybe if she hears someone like her speak, she'll believe she matters too. And maybe she'll stand up." Louis leaned his head gently against her shoulder. "You made them listen today." She nodded slowly, the weight of that truth sitting gently on her chest. "No," she said, "I didn't make them listen. I reminded them we're still here." The boardroom hadn't changed. Same glass walls, same brushed steel chairs, same filtered water in identical carafes lined neatly at the center. Owen stood at the head of the table, palms pressed flat against the cool wood surface, eyes, steady voice calm. This wasn't a pitch, not a plea. Just a man finally choosing to speak without the safety of spreadsheets. "I want to restructure a portion of our community investment portfolio," he began. "Not under marketing, not under brand strategy. I want it set aside, autonomous, with a separate advisory board and independent metrics." One of the directors leaned forward. "What would the return be?" Owen answered without hesitation. "Lives, stability, trust." Another asked, "And who exactly decides where this money goes?" "People on the ground," Owen said. "Educators, parents, community leaders, and Layla James will be one of them." Murmurs. Someone scribbled notes. A few eyebrows raised. From the far end, Genevieve shifted in her seat, adjusted her pen on the pad, and looked at him with a long, unreadable gaze. "You've diverted significant attention from the core business these past few months," one member said. "Some have questioned whether your focus is sustainable." Owen stepped away from the table slowly and gestured to the large digital screen behind him. But he didn't pull up numbers or trend lines. Instead, an image appeared. Louis seated on a folding chair reading to two younger children, the word Saturday Reading Circle chalked behind him. We built our success by solving problems other people overlooked, Owen said. We anticipated needs, we created value. But lately we've measured impact by margin alone. That's not enough. Not anymore. We have the chance to invest in what matters before it becomes a crisis. He paused, then added, I'm not walking away from the company. I'm walking deeper into it. Silence settled like dust. Genevieve finally spoke. And the brand, the optics. Owen met her eyes. The brand will survive telling the truth. And the truth is, for years, we benefited from a community we rarely spoke to. That stops now. She tapped her pen twice, a habit she always had when making peace with something she couldn't control. Then she nodded once. I don't agree with all of it, she said. But I've seen what it's done. Maybe that's the part I needed to see first. The vote passed. 2 weeks later, Owen sat in his home study, not with reports or market updates, but with a blank document open on his laptop. The title, Dear James, A Different Legacy. It wasn't for public release, just for himself. A way to record the shift, to acknowledge the man he used to be, and the man he was trying to become. He detailed the foundation's parameters, anonymous funding, no nameplates, no donor walls. Only one instruction that recipients never be required to perform gratitude, just to continue, to build, to live. He met Layla at the center that Saturday, the papers already signed, the structure approved. She sat on the back bench under the tree hands folded in her lap. He explained it all, the independence, the autonomy, the decision-making power. She listened, then finally said, You're not giving anything, Owen. You're returning it to the world that raised you. He looked at her and for a moment said nothing. Then he simply replied, Thank you. Louis handed him a letter that afternoon, handwritten on lined paper. Uncle O, if I ever become a doctor, I want to open a place like you did, where no one has to show their wallet before they show their wounds. Thank you for seeing us. Love, Louis. Owen kept that letter in his wallet, not in a safe, not on a wall. The following month, during an internal leadership summit, Layla was introduced quietly as an external advisor. No speech, no slideshow, just a name on the program and a seat at the table. Afterward, Owen and Louis walked through the company's atrium. They paused at a photo wall of past presidents, including Owen's father. Louis looked up. You think they'd be proud, Owen thought for a second. I think they'd finally recognize me. And you. As they left, an employee passing by said, Morning, Owen. No title, no stiffness, just a name said warmly. And Owen nodded, holding the door open for Louis, who stepped into the building like he belonged, because now he did.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.